I truly believe that when things are easy, you are not tested. I don't think that you get better.
This is 5 to 9, the podcast where we discover the hidden passions and hobbies that engineering, product, and technology leaders obsess over when the workday ends.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I'm super stoked about this episode. It's multiple layers I'm connected to this. But before we jump into this, do you mind actually sharing a little bit around who you are and actually geographically, where are you right now?
Okay, cool. Thanks, Andrew, for inviting me. Yeah, so right now I am in Ottawa, Canada. It's a place where I went to university. So I have a team here. I lead engineering for Precisely, a company based out of Boston, and I live just outside of San Diego in California.
Awesome. Okay. Well, now we get to what actually happens from 5 to 9 for Ulf. And so, we originally talked about this briefly.
Yeah.
But you've told me you're first at the high level, into motocross. So how do you get into motocross? And then we'll go into the details of how you're into motocross.
Yeah.
How did motocross even cross your mind?
So it's a long story, but I'll make it short. It sort of happened by accident. I have two sons. My oldest son was really interested in riding a dirt bike. And my wife and I talked about it. I didn't know anything about it really. And of course, I'd kind of been on one when I was younger, but I was sort of never into it and had done traditional sports. And at the time we were living in Ottawa, Canada. So I went out and bought him a Honda little 50cc dirt bike and started taking him riding. And we went to this track. It's here in Richmond, Ontario, outside of Ottawa. It's one of the oldest tracks in Canada, and it hosts one of the pro nationals in Canada. And we went, and it was on a weekend, and they were having a race there. And my son saw people his age racing. He couldn't believe it. He was blown away. He's like, I need to do this. And
did you know how to ride at this time? I mean,
not really. Okay. I've been on a dirt bike, but I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Really, is this? Are you sure?
And these people are jumping and all.
Yeah, they're jumping everything. They're you won't believe how fast they're going at this age. You're watching them, and it's incredible. The speed. So these tracks typically are about a little bit of over a 2-minute lap time. There's jumps on them. There's all kinds of obstacles, corners, ruts.
Help me, how fast are we talking? 20 miles per hour and 20 feet in the air? What are we talking here?
We're doing 40 miles an hour. And then of course the larger bikes, the full size bikes, 250s and 450s are they're 50, 60 plus in certain sections of the track, especially on the straight. So you're talking a lot of speed. They're in the air a lot, jumping from one obstacle to the next, doubles, triples, tabletops. So we're, of course, watching this, and my son was like, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, are you sure you don't want to play soccer or hockey? No, this is what I want to do. And we really didn't know much about it. Lots of people were helpful at the track. So I went home and started thinking about it and, eventually decided to do it. And that meant purchasing new bikes, race versions of these bikes, 65cc, 50cc, two-stroke race bikes. And all of a sudden we start looking at the cost of these things. We were like, wow, this is going to be expensive. And then that led into traveling for racing. So we started going to training at this track. And of course, my son started getting better and better and better. And he started doing his first race. He was sort of top 5. We were like, wow, he's already really good at this. And you could tell they were doing really well, and there's just only so much competition. And then we could maybe go to other places and find some more competition. And long story short, my younger son and my older son have made it to the pinnacle of amateur racing in the United States. And I would say, if anybody knows anything about it, there's this one really big amateur race every year in Tennessee, which is the Loretta Lynn's Amateur National. And my youngest son won motos there and placed second overall in the country. And to get there is a huge journey if anybody digs into it. But I won't talk about it too much. But it basically demonstrates that, we kind of have taken it to the highest levels.
So you're doing okay. So I get it. Okay, you're doing this is the story around how you got into it.
Yeah.
But the punchline I want to drive home is today we're not even talking about your sons alone. We're talking about what Ulf does And Ulf doesn't just serve as pit crew. He then proceeds to design the tracks and builds the tracks for your sons, right?
Right. So racing, motocross, there is essentially three elements. There's the motorcycle, which needs its own development and advancements specific to the rider. As you can tell, like if you watch any kind of form of racing, they always talk about like, well, we need to get this machine to work with this racer. And so there is a huge amount of work that goes into that. And I would say I definitely had to tackle that job as a father of two boys racing at the highest levels. The second part is obviously the racer, making sure they're physically fit, that they're strong, and of course, injuries, keeping them away from injuries, but advancing the rider both mentally and physically. And there's all kinds of work you need to do that. The third element is the track. Just like racing Formula One, every track has its particular uniqueness. It exposes weaknesses in the car, it's the same on a motocross track. And what I realized was most dads get the rider and the motorcycle figured out, and they leave the track to, I can get access to this particular public track. And for factory teams, which the best way to describe that is you should think of in racing, you've got, like factory Honda or factory Yamaha, the OEMs that manufacture, they have what's called their factory teams. They typically own tracks. They often own specifically Supercross tracks. And to get on a track like that is, very difficult for an amateur rider. And I decided that I didn't want to be asking, begging, figuring out, getting access to these tracks.
Yeah.
I want my own tracks. And everybody told me that's not possible in California. You can't do that. There's noise restrictions. There's this, there's that. You can't do it.
Ulf says, let me show you otherwise.
Yeah, I was like, no, there is a way. Just like it's like with software, right? It's like, no, you can't do that. And then of course there is a way.
There's always a way
in our lifetime, right? So that's kind of what I decided. And like with everything, it's like sort of this mental, the way that you approach things. It's like you can approach it like, okay, I don't know, but I'm not afraid to learn. And so building tracks is not just about having land. It's about planning. There's a lot to it in terms of like looking at what you have, let's call it your template, where you get to start with what the size of
okay. So we're getting into this, like this track part of it. So I'm actually interested because when I first heard this, like which you're about to jump into, but I'll set the frame for everybody. I'm like, I can see a track and I can see what's going on here, but there's like, it just doesn't manifest itself. Like, the world isn't shaped this way. So like, how do you even go about like doing this? And then like, let me check by this. You just said a factory, like as there's things, you made your own. Is anybody else doing this at all?
Okay. So I live in Southern California. I have factory tracks 1.5 miles from my house for KTM, which is a manufacturer. So they have 2 tracks, Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, a bunch of other tracks are maybe 30 minutes from my house. My son has access to the Honda factory track because he rides for a Honda team. Are there other dads doing what I'm doing? I can think of one other dad who does it, but not right in town in Southern California. He has a property sort of out of town, about 1.5 hours out of town. So there are dads out there, I would say, there are not many. There are a few. In Southern California specifically, there's 2 that I know of.
Okay, we're single digit counting, right?
Yes, we're single.
Okay. So for folks, I want to reset everybody. Okay, so this is a guy who like his kids got into like racing motorcycles. Okay, for simplicity on this stuff, and this is motocross, supercross. You can explain those things to me in a second on those things. But he's like, because of this sport requires motorcycles and fitness and stuff, but you need to ride on a track and it's hard to get time. So this guy Ulf decides like, well, I'm going to solve this by like making our own track. And you're implying this, like the formula is you need land. You said, of course you need land. Like, and then I think it's a lot of land, okay, because you got to raise this thing. And it's what a motorcycle would do in 2 minutes driving it's at least that. And then you need to build jumps, berms, like all these things to actually assemble it. Like, am I getting that right? Is it the framing?
Yeah, that's exactly
okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
like I
for
said,
so for
go
the
ahead.
for the vocabulary newbies here, including me, like what's the layman's quickie one sentence? What's the difference between motocross and supercross? Like in my head, those are motorcycles who ride on the dirt. Like what is
Yeah.
that?
So they both are on dirt, and the major difference is Supercross is held at stadiums. So yeah, so think of a floor plan: Arizona Cardinals football stadium, Anaheim Angels. So Supercross is about a 3 acre format in terms of floor plan, and you're basically dealing with either a football stadium or a baseball stadium. And then the track builders lay a foundation down, usually plywood, and then they stack dirt on top of that and build it. They have a blueprint prior to that, so they know what the design is going to be because they have to fit all these obstacles into this track. They build it 3 days before the event. They tear it down the night that the
So it's a
event is.
formula. It's a formula
Correct.
that they're running. Okay.
Yeah,
Whereas yours is in the open, in the nature, and the
yeah,
stuff, and it's in dirt, and you're formula. That's motocross.
yeah. No, so just to complete that, so Supercross. So that's the format, like in terms of the size and how you plan it.
Okay.
Motocross tracks are built in terrain that is natural,
Okay.
meaning I have a property typically 20 to 30 acres is a motocross track. So the scale of it is much larger. It's a much faster track, much more open, and the floor plan of that is much larger. And they typically incorporate the natural terrain. Like if there's a natural hill, they'll incorporate it into the track. Supercross tracks are like specific. Like they have all the same elements and they're completely on a flat surface.
They're engineered. They're like
Right.
pieces put to. Okay.
And I have an outdoor track on a
Okay.
24-acre property in Southern California, and I have a Supercross track on a 3-acre pad in my backyard. So
You have both.
so I've recreated what Supercross track builders build for the series in my backyard.
And then you also have, in addition, another
Correct.
piece of land where you've
Yeah.
actually got
Well,
a
you can
motocross.
consider them like two disciplines. So as a motocross professional rider, you have two disciplines you must master. Motocross racing, which is quote unquote outdoor racing. There's a series associated with that. Pro Motocross Series is happening right now. It's a summer series. They just had a race in Pennsylvania on the weekend, and it's aired on Peacock TV, NBC Sports. And then Supercross Series is a winter series. It starts in January, ends in May, and it goes to stadium by stadium across the country, spans all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Got it. Okay. So, like, I don't have this, but let's pretend I got some room in my backyard. And I'm like, okay, let's build a Supercross-ish track here. Ulf's going to help me do it. What do we do?
Yeah. So I started with measuring my backyard. The first thing that you have to have is a level pad. You can't, so if your
Flat
backyard
land. Okay.
is a hill, you can't build a Supercross track. It needs to, the grading of this pad needs to be no more than 5% of a grade. So it needs to be very, very flat. So that's number one. The second thing is you need a lot of dirt. And so
What does that mean? Like dump truck? Like what are we talking? A lot of dirt.
yeah. So to give you an idea, you probably need 4,000 yards of dirt. A
Those
typical
are cubic
dump truck
yards. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
A typical dump truck's 12 yards, sometimes as large as a truck in tandem is 20 yards. So if you do the math on that,
Yeah.
like,
So you're just like, are you just like order that online, or does the dirt have to already be there, or like it's like it's at Home Depot? I just go there and click a button and be like, hey, send me 4,000 yards of dirt.
Yeah,
Bring
if
it
you
on.
went to Home Depot and ordered it, you'd need millions of dollars. No, I mean, so I'll tell you at least how I did it. I think everybody goes through a different journey. If you have, let's say, other property that you could truck it in, or if you had enough land that you, let's say, wanted to dig a pond, then you could get enough dirt
Okay.
to generate, right?
Hopefully your land has dirt already. So you got land, it's flat, you got some dirt, right? A bunch of dirt.
My land had some dirt, but not enough. So what I have been doing is I see construction sites in my area. For example, building roads or putting in restaurants or anything like that. I look at the dirt. I quickly pull over if I like it. And I go and talk to the person who's managing the job site. I say, where are you dropping this dirt off? And if you're close enough, you can convince them to filter and drop that dirt off at your property. And that is what I've done. And I've probably brought in around 25,000 yards, like 2,500 yards of extra dirt into my property.
And this is like, when you look at the dirt, it's like the granularity, is it clay or is it like sandy or that kind of stuff? Right?
This is a great question. So you cannot build a Supercross track with sand.
Right, because it'll all fall down.
It just moves too quickly. You can build a motocross track with sand because you don't mind it moving. But the way, and we're kind of getting into the sort of specifics on Supercross, there is a formula and there's measurements and specifics on everything that you build, and it has to kind of hold together. And so the way to describe it is you need a particular type of soil, and it needs to be clay-based.
Okay.
For Supercross.
I know my dirt. I know my dirt.
Right. Like you get a quick eye for that. You know, like clay is more difficult to work with and move with equipment, but it forms really well and holds together really well and sheds water. So like you have to think of that when you're building this track, because maintenance becomes, you know, a big part of taking care of a track. You basically have to return the track to its original format and
every time you ride it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about going back to like, you know, what you're doing when you start to build it. So again, you need to lay it out. And one of the tools that I use was like Google Earth, because you can do measurements. So if you look up your property on Google Earth, like you can do a line and measure it on Google Earth, and it'll tell you how long that line is. So I took a look at my property and measured out, you know, the width, the length of it. And I had a piece of, you know, sort of specifics on the details on the size of the pad that I had to work with, and put that on drafting paper. And then I had access to blueprints of Supercross tracks. A friend of mine builds tracks.
Because there's kind of rule, like there's standards of like, I need this many jumps and like stutter bumps here and like a flat top here and like, like we talked about this. The only reason I know any of these words is in the 90s, I used to race mountain bikes, and mountain bikes borrowed a lot of this stuff from the dirt bike world, right? So like those.
So I'll talk about some of them. So I'll just kind of name them, and people can sort of connect with it. So you have whoops. Every Supercross track has whoops, and it kind of sounds like a goofy name, right?
Yeah. What's a whoop?
Whoop is essentially a 3-foot high bump, like made out of dirt that you string together. So you typically at least have 9, sometimes more. You have a starter whoop and then 9 exactly symmetrical, exactly the same size built. And the goal of the rider is to enter those whoops and get through them as quickly as he can.
So it's like this, like,
and it's like, honestly, one of the most dangerous places on the track for a rider. It takes a lot of work to learn how to enter them. You can imagine they're going in 4th gear into these whoops at my track. 4th gear on a 250 or a 450, it's 40 miles an hour into these whoops that if your front wheel drops into, you'll
flip over the front. Yeah.
So whoops are a hugely important part of the track. And there's specific ways to build them. There's 2 ways to build them. Well, essentially 2 ways. There's a dozer built set of whoops and a loader built set of whoops. Dozer is a track machine with a blade on the front of it. A loader is 4 wheels articulated with a huge bucket on it. And the whoops that are built with a dozer, you start with a pad. Again, you're about 1.5 feet off the ground, exactly 25 feet wide. And you have to measure out the length to fit in the whoops. And again, the measurements are really important because whoops are either 13 or 14 foot center whoops, meaning the top of the whoop to the next one is 14 feet or 13 feet, like depending. And so when you build them, you have to measure all that out, because you can't just like start building it and then realize, oh, I've run out of space here between this next corner and I don't have enough room for the landing. So everything's like pre-measured. So I'm just talking through those terms. Again,
like I get it. So like I'm here. You got your Google Earth. You pulled out your plan, and you've got these kind of like different like building blocks that you're kind of assembling this track, because you got your standards. You got and you assemble them together. Yeah. And I think you're about to lead into how you're building them, because you just dropped construction vehicles.
That's true. Yeah. So
which is the other prop line. Yeah. But it's okay. So, like I'm previewing for folks. this guy owns big old yellow like construction vehicles in his backyard to build this thing. Okay, now I get to your point on this stuff.
Yeah, so to finish the building blocks, so we talked about whoops. There's triple jumps. So think of triple jumps as a takeoff, another jump in the middle of it, and then a landing. That's a triple jump. A double is a takeoff and a landing. And then there's a tabletop. You think of you can either jump over the tabletop, but it's flat, so there's not a gap in between it. Then there's single jumps, berms, which are corners that are built up. They have height to them. So all these different elements. So when you're looking at this blueprint, like I just described on this piece of drafting paper, you want to fit as many of those elements into the track as you can in order to be able to make the track interesting for the riders and exciting for the riders.
Okay, so it's not always the same order of these things. It's however you can cram them in the space you have, but yet still makes a flow that you could actually ride it.
Yeah, so if you look up the Pro Supercross series, they announce the track maps prior to the series. So all the riders can go and look at them and download those images and say, oh, this track is really cool. It has this and this track has this. But they have all the same elements, but they're mixed so that every time they go to the track, they know like a triple jump is the same size generally within a few feet. The whoops are the same size, they're inconsistent. The doubles are, and the berms have this certain radius to them. So they get this feel for them. But of course, what's exciting to the riders, just like a Formula One track, is, has this corner, has a straight. They get to experience different things, and it brings out the best of certain riders each week. So again, looking at this, thinking back to the design of my tracks, I've built 4 tracks in the last 5 years, so almost one a year, and almost new track layout every year. And I do that, and I make changes during the year as well, in order to, hey, we're going to this race. We really need a dragon's back because this race has a dragon's back. So I need to go build this dragon's back, and a dragon's back is like whoops up a hill onto a single. So of course, you look at your layout, and certain layouts, like you have to kind of be smart, like because you have to plan like a triple jump takes up a lot of space. So you have to plan like where you're going to place it. And so once your track design is complete, it's measured. So you have the measurements for everything because a tabletop is 16 feet, 25 feet wide. The next single is 24 feet out. So you can sort of lay everything out. Everything's measured on this drafting sheet. And now you have your layout. So now the next step that you have to take is you need to grade the property and make sure the grading is correct. Meaning, going back to what I said earlier, you
have to level it. Yeah.
And then you start with a pile of dirt right down the middle of the track, exactly in the middle of the track. And the reason why you do that is you need to process the dirt. The dirt needs to be consistent. Now it needs to be mixed up. And you use a loader to bring all the dirt into the center of this track.
What's a loader? And it sounds like you have one.
Yeah. So a loader, what I have is called a mid-size loader. It's a Volvo L110. You can think about it as like the tires are the size of much taller than me. They're huge tires, 4-yard bucket. So you'll typically see that if you're driving along the road, somebody's moving large amounts of dirt.
Well, it's like a front digger thing.
Right. It's a front digger. Okay. It's articulated. So the way that you steer it is through hydraulics. So as you turn the wheels, the front turns hydraulically, right? And the wheels don't turn like this. The machine actually articulates like this. Okay. So you can get in and out of places really quickly with it. But really what it's great at is moving dirt quickly. 4-yard bucket is a lot of dirt. And, so you've got all this dirt piled. Then you go do the layout of the track. And the layout is fluorescent spray paint, wooden stakes that you hammer in, and string lines. And you start laying out your what's called...
That looks like a big garden, I know, or like a weird construction site where you got
it's just like that.
Or snap lines with the concrete.
If you're pouring concrete and you're making curbs, you would do the same thing. And the point of this is, if you're not doing it in a professional way, you might just throw dirt here and there. And at the end of the day, your layout is going to fail because you didn't measure anything out. You need to measure everything out so you know where to place dirt. And it makes it efficient at building the track and also makes it consistent. And so again, once you have that all laid out, then you're ready to start placing dirt. And then that's actually the fun part. Like all the stuff that we've just been talking about, it's a sort of tedious work. And then you finally get to jump in the machine There's essentially three roles in building a track. It's the loader operator, which is called the spotter. That person's placing dirt.
Is that
Then
is that
there's
you?
I do all three.
Okay.
I've done all three.
But you actually need three people at the time to do it.
Yeah, like I built some whoops by myself on Saturday. Well, I had a person join me to help me, but he's still sort of learning, so I kind of training him. But I operated all three pieces of equipment. So a loader, dozer, and a skid steer. So let me finish on the machines.
Yeah, sorry.
Bulldozer is a track. So I own a Komatsu D39 PX22, which is a mid-sized dozer. It has a 10-foot blade on the front of it. So think of a big blade that articulates left and right, sideways, up and down.
So you push the dirt.
You push dirt with it. You grade with it. You push dirt. And then I have a skid steer. It's a CAT 259D. It's considered the best skid steer for building Supercross tracks, but it's a track, rubber tracks. And essentially you do all the fine shaping with that.
So it's like you say, like tank treads, like it just like
it's got tank treads like the dozer does, but it's a small machine, very small. It fits in between the jumps.
Well, it's kind of like a Bobcat looking kind of thing.
Correct. It's like a Bobcat. That was a brand.
It's the one I see on the street. That's why I recognize that one.
Correct.
Yeah.
So those are the three machines I have. I run all of them.
And did you pack the dirt with the Bobcat thing? Because you got to get it firm, right? No.
Yeah, essentially it does. Every machine has its compaction capability. The bulldozer has a highest compaction capability. So again, like now you start placing the dirt and you shape it. And of course, every obstacle has a certain amount of dirt that needs to be delivered to it. And there's actually a formula for that.
So everything is spec'd. This is actually, despite the fact that it looks like it's dirt, it's like highly precise engineering.
Yes. Yeah. And that's actually what makes it so interesting, because if you don't do it that way, first of all, it takes much longer. It never has the right feel to it. And then you're training riders on something that isn't what they're going to race on. So do
the specs ever change? Like, do they go international? Like the Dragon's Back is changing this year. We're adding 2 feet to it. Everyone's
there is some interpretation, but I would say the main series of Supercross, they're very consistent. You will get difference in the distances on whoops, like I mentioned, between 13 and 14 feet. Like there is a little bit of a range there. And then sometimes in order to fit certain obstacles, there is a slight range, but generally speaking, they're very consistent. The builders do that for a number of reasons. It's repeatable and consistent for them when they will build the track. And it's time, because if you don't follow those particular specifics and don't measure and all those kinds of things, like all of a sudden, like you have a timeline to meet. And of course, in a stadium, you have a certain amount of time to get everything done. So I'm trying to translate that and mimic that when I build the track at my house, in order for my son to be training on something that's consistent and the same as what he's going to race. So back to the machine. So now we know which machines we have and what we're using. The next step is placing dirt. And then once the dirt is placed, you're shaping it. I mean, again, going back to specifics, like when you build what's called a 3-foot single jump, you're going to place 2 loads on the outside. So you have these stakes with the markings. You're going to place a load here. You're going to place a load here. You're going to place a load again on the outside and again on the outside. So 2 loads on each. And then the middle just gets 1 because of the overlap. And then now that's done. Then that's done. Then the loader moves off to go do the next one. And then the dozer shows up. The dozer shapes that single. And the dozer's tracks are used to compress the dirt, but the blade is used to shape the dirt. So you think of like, you're kind of shaping the dirt and then you're tracking it in to compress the dirt.
There is some art to this. There's art to running the machine to achieve the shape, right?
Yeah, like operating the machine. Like, again, like I started at ground zero. So
I'll just say, like, you didn't know this beforehand.
No, I didn't. I'd never been in a machine before. I just went and bought my first machine and was terrible at it.
On Amazon, you just click the buy it now button.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It was something that took thousands of hours to get better at. Like I have thousands of hours in a machine. Like fast forward to today, I maintain my track plus other tracks, and I work every weekend. I work every Saturday, every Sunday, and multiple evenings after work. So it's a lot of time, a lot of effort to, like you said, the art part of becoming a great operator starts with having an attention to detail and having great hand-eye coordination, and then understanding dirt and understanding moisture in dirt, because that can affect, and using the right machine for the right job. Like you kind of, like I said, I have to run 3 different machines.
But you learned this all on your own. Like
Yeah.
you didn't there wasn't a master class that you watched.
No, I mean, I'm very lucky because I did have 2 friends that I got to meet that are professional track builders that had been working on the series, and I've built tracks, helping them build tracks. So I had a chance to observe and watch. And when I go to a race, like most people go and buy, snacks during the intermission, I watch the guys running the machines.
Like I can just imagine you're getting lunch for your family. You're like, dirt, pull over.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
I think you have to have a lot of, obviously, passion. And I mean, my passion is driven by wanting to help my kids, and help my son win and succeed. And that's a driving force. But I also think you need to have a passion for wanting to create something.
Yeah. Well, this is my theory on this, by the way, like connecting it back to your work. Like this is, as you kind of get into forms of like leadership, you sometimes like we're both trained as engineers, right? Like you're a maker first, and then all of a sudden when you're doing kind of management and business things, you sometimes don't get the maker fulfillment in the same way, or at least maybe I'm projecting in this part of it. This might be your outlet too, right? Like you get to do some of that, right?
I think you're absolutely right. Like I would say, if I was trying to explain like where this comes from, obviously started my career and my job was so focused on building. And I would say like my role now is, I mean, I have 620 people on my team. Like it's building, but it's like building a team.
Yeah,
but I have
it's
this
different.
like raw to like actually producing something myself, making something. And I think that's what's driven that passion. And of course, there's nothing more motivating than somebody saying that you can't do something. There's nothing more motivating than
let me show you.
And racing is about getting an advantage. I mean, every single team that races Formula One is trying to figure out what the other competitors are doing to beat them. And I looked at our competitors and I'm like, I'm gonna figure out a way to get my son an advantage.
Yeah, more track time, right? Like that's your advantage here, and to know why these things are built. And then okay, so you've got all this stuff assembled. Does your son's like then after you got to build this and all this technique and all this skill, and then do they then like, Dad, can I try? Can I test run it? Did you build it right? Like, are they your QA or you QA at first?
They are, but I'm very fortunate because my younger son Noah is very connected with a lot of high level pros. So, and then I am as well because Eli Tomac is the 2020. Let me make sure I got this right. 2022 Supercross champion. And he was the first, like our last track build, he was the first person to ride it and test it. And that's like getting feedback from somebody like that. So I've had, out of the top 10 450 riders, I've probably had half of them at my track at one point or another. So we have very high level riders who get to test our track out. And my son, Noah, his team uses my track one day a week. And so those riders are riding with him. So he is a tester, of course, but I didn't measure it on that first. And like, he's obviously still learning and he's like, the youngest on the team and all that kind of stuff. So I had to test it out with the most high level riders that are out there.
I'm drawing the analogy because you got pro QA here.
Yeah.
So in the SDLC, what's your cycle time to like building this track? Like if I were like making a track, and the analogy here, like,
I would say if weather is not a factor, because weather has been a factor for me in the past where it's raining and then you're not building anything, like from start to finish for me with some help is 2 weeks. And that's like after work. Like, so I work East Coast time and I'm in California. So let's say I'm finishing at like 3 and I can get in like 3-4 hours until it's dark. And
this is actually what I was going to ask you. Like, how do you make this all fit? Right. And I think you're like, one is schedule and just forcing your life to make it, right? Like this is.
Yeah, it's tricky because I travel a lot too. So, everything sort of is scheduled, right? Like everything has to be sort of pre-scheduled and my wife helps me with that. And I've looked back and I'm like, what am I doing? Like I sometimes ask that question. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm trying to fit too much in, but I have, again, this drive like to want to do it and want to get it right and want to make it as perfect as I can make it.
Well, you made it work. You're building these crazy situations and working on your company and work and all this of that. Like you've made it fit in this like, you know, puzzle piece thing. Like how does making tracks and living that part of your brain change or influence the way you do things professionally? Like how do they touch each other? Or is it like just about like getting, you know, an outlet and some solace here? Or like how do you juxtapose the two?
I truly believe that when things are easy, you are not tested. And I don't think that you get better. And I think it's the same with work. Like, so when I think about how, like, what racing, like racing fundamentally, like what's driven me to, like, and we've been talking about tracks today, you know, what racing has done is it's driven me as a father to be involved with my kids directly. It's driven me to learn new things that I would have never, like, I rebuild engines. I mean, I promise you, like, I didn't know, I have a clue about how to do that before I started running equipment. Again, what I'll say, like when something's really hard, and racing is that, and it's, think about what racing has done to technology and driven technology. Like it's these big problems that are, they start off as insolvable. And then you, all of a sudden you look back 10 years or 5 years or whatever, and you're like, wow, look what we came through. And so I would say it starts with that mentality. Like I really do believe that that has made me better at my job, that my normal job, because I'm like, this is not a big deal. Like
Right.
when
Yeah.
something shows up, like I'm like,
This is less than
like,
40,000 yards of dirt. I got this, right? Yeah.
let's just calm down here for a second. Like we're gonna get through this. And I think what it is it's like what you choose in life, like what is actually interesting to me and what makes me happy is to be working and on the go. Like I'm not trying to like, how do I get through work today so I can relax? Like I'm actually not that into it. Like
You're
I'm
like
not,
a push. You're pushing.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
and I think for other people it is, and that's fine. Like I'm not judging anybody for that, but for me as a person, it's like I want to be pushed and tested like all the time because it makes me, I would say it makes me motivated, it makes me excited, it makes me like focused. And I would say like it is very translated into the way that I work. And I would also say the other part of it is when you do those kinds of things, like let's call it like like this is manual labor, and like it's like putting yourself in other people's shoes and having empathy about what those jobs are. Like sometimes that can disappear if you're in a very senior role for a long time and you forget like what an engineer has to go through to, like, let's say, fix a bug. I always use this analogy about bug fixing, which you might be interested in, your audience might be interested in. It's like there's a sinkhole in a road. You call me because I can run equipment. Ulf, come fix this sinkhole. And you know the city manager's there, and like, when are you going to have this sinkhole fixed? Because it's shut the road down and traffic is, you know, out of control. If I told you a date on when that sinkhole has been going to be fixed without looking at the sinkhole, that you shouldn't believe a word I say, right? It's like if I told you how long the bug's going to be fixed when I haven't even looked at the code, don't believe a word I say. And so there's a lot of parallels. Like it's like once you open it up and you start looking at the code, and it's like, wow, this one looks like a 2-week effort plus testing, et cetera. Like it's the same with the sinkhole. You dig into it and you're like, oh my God, there's a water vein broken here. We've got to fix that. And then, you know, so there's so many parallels that you can draw, and you can use that experience to remind yourself about those.
Love it. Right. So punchline, if bug, need jerk, right? Is that?
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Oh, this is amazing. Like there's so many layers of like,
yeah,
just new stuff here that I'm learning on this stuff. If someone else really wanted to learn how to do so, how do you even get started? Like go to a Supercross track and meet some folks and watch some folks. Or like what's like, how do you like this? Like sometimes we talk, it's like, oh, I just watch YouTube. This is like so far away from that. But like, how do you even nose your way into this world here?
Yeah, I would say it starts with watching the series. If you ask the same question about how do I race Formula One, like, you know, you're going to get in a go-kart. I mean, you're gonna get in a go-kart or a sim.
Okay. Start easy, and then whether you choose to engage in just watching the race or
Correct.
racing yourself,
yeah,
or actually eventually building the track, they're all part of that journey along the way.
Yeah, I actually will add something though. So there is a big MX sim community now.
Okay.
My son is highly involved in it.
Virtual, like it's put on the goggles and go at it kind of
Correct. Thing. And there is a friend of my son who built a sim version of our track for the series. And he started with a Google image of the track. So Google takes photos of our property. And then my son ran out and did some more videos and sent it to him. And so imagine that. You don't even need to buy equipment. You don't need, like, you can start working and designing tracks based off of that game, and then you could ride that track simulated. But I would say, like, that's a new way of approaching it.
To touch it. I love it. Right. And it connects with the digital world that we all live in.
Yeah. And so the game's called MX Sim.
MX Sim. All right. Well, Ulf, this is beyond fun. I got to find a way to visit you and see this whole thing. This anytime. Is super cool. I hope to get to ride in a dozer or something like that. That's my contribution. Thank you for being here. This has been the best.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
Andrew Lau here. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 5 to 9. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. Who knows what hidden talents and hobbies we'll discover in the next episode of 5 to 9.